A long while back, we got the Monument to Lost Light, aka the Exotic Kiosk, which lets you buy older exotics from content that has been cycled out of the game. And almost 2 years ago, to the day, I made a guide on what I think you should buy. But a lot of things have changed in 2 years, and it's time for an update. A lot of my guidance here is going to be biased towards the high end of PvE, so that's raids, dungeons, Grandmaster Nightfalls, and master content in general. The reason is because anything at legend difficulty or lower does not really demand any specific loadout outside of anti-champion capabilities, and thus any exotic you choose to buy will be more than fine. If you think something like Jotun is awesome and you want to bring it into the hero tier of the Nightfall, I am not going to stop you. Most of my opinions here also do not take builds into account. I am simply reviewing the weapon itself and how it performs, as this is more for people who are maybe not as in tune with the exotic weapon sandbox or the sandbox in general. However, I will make some notes of weapons that are used in builds which may affect their grade. Remember that the meta is always changing though, and things that are terrible can become great, and things that are great can become terrible at a moment's notice. We're going to start with the best to worst for PvE, and then we're going to do PvP. The top PvE weapons that are actually getting use in high-end content are Le Monarch, Tiku's Divination, Witherhoard, and ehhhh's Scepter. Both of the exotic bows are top tier primary weapons in stuff like Grandmaster Nightfalls. They hit hard, they are overwhelming favorites when it comes to anti-champion capabilities, and are just generally very strong primary options. You'll notice a theme in this video in that the current meta revolves around legendary linear fusions, and because your power weapon isn't tied up in using an exotic, that leaves room to play around with exotic primaries and specials. Bows are no slouches when it comes to endgame content. Witherhoard has sort of taken over the role of Anarchy in PvE, as Witherhoard leaves a damage over time pool on the ground. It's not a traditional grenade launcher. Being able to do damage while you're doing damage is a very good thing, and again, with the current meta favoring legendary weapons, this allows you to use Witherhoard in addition to firing a linear fusion. But be aware that you will need the catalyst for the auto reload functionality. And because Witherhoard is an exotic that came with a season pass, specifically season 11, this means that catalyst progression is painfully slow, much slower than other weapons because it's not getting the seasonal boost that it normally would. I'll put an asterisk next to exotics that have this painfully slow catalyst progression. This is something Bungie really should address, but I'm not going to get into that for this video. For all intents and purposes though, if a weapon has a catalyst, you should try to get it, as it will, at best, dramatically improve the weapon's strength, and at worst, give it some extra stats. ehhh's Scepter is a fantastic ad-clear type weapon for any high-end piece of content, even if you're not using a stasis subclass, although that does certainly help. Just keep in mind that you need to own Beyond Light to access stasis. Not only is it capable of that, but with its overcharge mode, can constantly freeze champions. This is most helpful on barrier champions, as they'll never get a chance to actually put up a shield while you're shooting them in the overcharge mode. It can also do okay boss damage, but it's mainly best at ad clear. Next, let's take a look at some strong options, contenders I called them last time. These are all very good weapons in their own right, but aren't at the absolute peak of the meta. Those weapons include Sleeper Simulant, Whisper of the Worm, Legend of Acreus, Izanagi's Burden, Anarchy, and Lawrence Driver. I'm personally going to throw Outbreak Perfected in here as well, as I think it deserves to be up here more than it does in a lower bracket. I would say that most of these weapons are either 1. A slight buff or a nerf to another weapon type away from being top tier, or 2. Very situationally strong. For example, Sleeper, Whisper, Izanagi's, and Anarchy are all very strong boss damage options, but are just outshined right now. Legend of Acreus is here and also was in this tier last time because if the situation is right, it is just an absolute damage menace. It also got a catalyst buff where it now gets Trench Barrel, a very strong perk. Lawrence Driver is just a very good linear fusion rifle in its own right, but it isn't the force that it used to be when it first came out. These are the things that you should have ready to go just in case Bungie makes a change to them or a situation arises where they can now become the best. Next, we had what I called the low-key tier, stuff that was pretty good, maybe went a bit under the radar. Nowadays, I would call this tier the it's fine tier. It's the mid-tier stuff. I digress. Ace of Spades, Jotun, Thorn, Lumina, Bad Juju, Ariana's Vow, Bastion, Symmetry, Ruinous Effigy, Traveler's Chosen, Duality, and Trespasser. All of these weapons are fine. Are they bad? No. Are they insanely good? I would not say so either, although some are definitely better than others, Ace of Spades being a prime example. Ruinous Effigy is a pretty strong weapon as well, but I didn't want to just put Ace and Ruinous Effigy in their own tier. Ariana's Vow used to be one of the best weapons in the entire game, but has been power crept out by Arbalest, and is also an exotic with a painfully slow catalyst. Traveler's Chosen has build potential, but is ultimately a sidearm in PvE, which is fine. Most of these weapons are usable, maybe they work with certain builds, Traveler's Chosen for example, but the stuff mentioned in the top tiers are more what's in the meta currently or has the potential to be. Next we have the not quite the bottom of the barrel tier, stuff that's not completely irrelevant, it's still functional but maybe isn't that commonly used, or maybe it's a more for fun kind of thing. This includes Polaris Lance, Last Word, Truth, Leviathan's Breath, Devil's Ruin, Tommy's Matchbook, Fourth Horseman, Cryosthesia, and Grand Overture. None of these weapons really permeate the meta in any sort of significant way. There might be an occasional thing that pops up, maybe someone does something crazy with one of these weapons or a funny thing, but without some more significant attention, these are going to remain in this tier. Finally, we have the this is for your collections only tier, stuff that is more or less irrelevant. These include Sturm, Mida, Rat King, and Worldline Zero. The only reason you need these is to fill out your collection. That is it. My only note is on Rat King. Rat King on its own has a lot of build potential, but I like to focus on the group stacking part of this exotic, where having 5 other people with Rat King near you buffs it very highly. There is always some amount of potential here with a group, but thus far it has never been something that has been taken very seriously. Now let's shuffle over to PvP with an emphasis on Trials of Osiris. Honestly, this list is going to be very short as a lot of exotics in this list are much more PvE focused than PvP, and there's only a small handful of weapons that I would remotely consider. The meta is also changing much more rapidly than it is in PvE, so I'm trying to only include weapons that I think will be a good choice almost no matter what the meta is. Those weapons are Rat King, specifically with an invisibility build, Outbreak Perfected, Ace of Spades, Last Word if you're a controller player, Le Monarch if you want to be that guy, Jotun, Thorn, Taraba, Devil's Ruin, Lawrence Driver, and maybe Trespasser. Within this group of weapons lies a tier list of its own, but there is one weapon that without a doubt will always remain relevant to some degree, and that is Ace of Spades. If you are looking for something that is almost guaranteed to be a good weapon, no matter what the meta is, it's Ace of Spades. It is time tested, and I do not see Bungie messing with it at all. Sidearm recommendations are coming strictly because at this very moment, sidearms are the meta. If you're watching this video, November 2022. I do not expect this meta to stay around for a very long time, so purchase sidearms with caution. Outbreak Perfected is just a decent pulse rifle, but there are plenty of other legendary pulse rifles to pick and craft from, which will serve you better. Last Word used to be much more of a menace if you were on controller. It did get a nerf recently, but it's still kicking around. It is a much different gameplay experience to a typical hand cannon though. Jotun is more of a meme weapon, but it is still quite strong and obnoxious to fight against thanks to its more than slight tracking on its shots. Thorn is in this group with Ace of Spades in that I think it'll always be relevant in some way, but it isn't as consistent. Taraba had some flashes in the pan recently, but I'm not sure it's a weapon I would suggest to newer players. I'm just mentioning it because it had some moments over the past year. Le Monarch used to be much more annoying with one-shot potential in certain situations, and because of the hot swap meta where people shoot a bow shot and then immediately switch to a new weapon. Le Monarch is still plenty annoying, but it isn't as prolific as it used to be. Lawrence Driver comes as a suggestion on the tail end of a recent linear fusion rifle nerf. The jury's still out on whether or not linears are actually that much worse, so again, buy with caution, but Lawrence Driver is a great PvE weapon, so if you do buy it and it gets nerfed in PvP, it's not like you can't use it in other places. Pretty much every other weapon on this list is not something I'm really going to tell people to spend their currencies on. With crafted weapons being a thing, it has never been simpler to get a perfectly crafted god roll weapon. It's time consuming, but it's a simple process. Most of the top weapons in trials currently are crafted weapons or exotics that are not in the exotic kiosk. In fact, Lawrence Driver is pretty much the only one out of the top 10 or so, but again, that is coming off of a recent linear fusion nerf where things are still to be determined. Finally, we have the Sparrow, always on time. This has remained the fastest Sparrow in the game for some reason, but you sacrifice handling for that speed. This is not something I recommend people buy unless you basically have nothing else that you would like to purchase. I do not recommend buying it if you are a new player. Don't worry about this. Again, metas can change at any moment. We are a couple of months away from a new expansion where anything can happen, but hopefully this video stays relevant for a little while. If anything, I can always do another update. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.